Should I go ahead? Then I've the other hand raised here.
Oh, Richard, was that your only question, Richard? Okay, Douglas.
Okay, so I've got a top bar hive, and I got a local swarm from someone about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and the things are just going fantastically. Every time we check, we're I mean, we couldn't ask for a better group of bees. I guess my question is, what's going to go wrong? Like, what should I? Because right now, beekeeping seems pretty easy, and I guess we're just at a loss as to what to expect or to anticipate.
Can I answer? Can I start?
Sure.
Yes.
So, are your combs all nice and straight? Are they building
They
straight?
are incredibly straight. I mean, we're perplexed by how straight they are. We had a comb that we started them with that someone had given us, and that obviously served as a model. But I think we've had to do a little tiny bit of trimming on one of them, but that's it. There's no cross combing, nothing.
Okay, so the next thing I can think of is a disaster I had with the top bar several years ago, and that's when it got so hot. And I waited a little bit into the day before I opened that hive, and combs started dropping off the frames and just basically destroyed the hive, because it just, it just seemed to the domino effect took place.
Well, that's something that it sounds like would be out of my control.
No, it is in your control, because if you look at the bees early in the morning, it has to be warmer than 65, but don't let it get hot when you start looking at those frames.
Okay. Oh, you mean when we look at them, it shouldn't be hot out?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that is enough.
And the other thing that can happen is, if you, wish I had a frame in here, but if your comb is hanging down off of the frame, some people I've seen start tilting.
No, we're a no tilt. We're a no tilt.
Okay, and when you hold your frame and you want to see the other side, you switch.
We're very good at that. I think that's our problem.
Okay.
We've been doing this for a month, and we're experts, because nothing's gone wrong. Everything's gone just fantastically, and we're just expert at it. And I know that something is going to go wrong at some point soon, and I don't know what. I'm just waiting to see what. And I don't know anything about mites. I mean, I know about what I've read, but I don't know how to assess them. And it's. I guess my question is a little too general.
Well, it's not just a top bar question either. It's a total beekeeping question. Gerald, what do you think?
Well, I mean, a lot of things can go wrong. Obviously, when you first start out, it's nice because the bees will, get in there and they'll do their thing and they'll get everything going. They'll build like crazy. And right now we've got some good resources coming in still, but the dearth is coming up. Here in about another month or so, we'll probably start seeing a real lack of resources, and so you just need to make sure the bees have plenty of resources to make it through that. I wouldn't worry too much about mites just yet, but going into winter, you want to make sure you got a strong hive and that you treat for mites prior to your winter bees, or about the time all your winter bees are emerging. So that'll be a thing for later, and it's not even something that you probably need to worry about this year, just with new bees and new brood and new wax and everything else. The mite population can be very low, but you do need to keep an eye out on that and make sure that they don't get out of control, because they can pretty quick. So that's just a couple things about mites. As far as I'm not a top bar beekeeper, but I've got do have hives that I have the equivalent of top bars in, which are my mating nukes, and I started actually keeping letting the bees build their own foundation in langstroth frames. So just going with whatever they want to build. If they want to build drone comb, if they want to build smaller bee cells, and they do. That's something that I've noticed is they definitely, bees are a lot smaller when you let them build their own comb. So, but as long as you've got plenty of food in there and they're multiplying like they should, things should go fairly well, especially for the first year.
Fair enough.
All right. Does that answer your question?
I guess it does. You know, again, I mean, I'm asking for something that you know, maybe it's unanswerable. You know, you know, what me, the expert beekeeper at 4.5 weeks or so, what am I going to do wrong next? Because so far it's been easy, like I say. And the more I read, the more I see that there are a lot of things that can go wrong. But
So,
yeah.
how often are you opening your hive?
We're opening, you know, kind of when we feel like it. And so I guess that would be once a week, once every 10 days. Sometimes, you know, if someone wants to see it, we'll do it. Maybe, I think once we did it, you know, at a 3-day interval. We're trying to stretch it out 10 days, more or less. Again, they're like, they're just really straight. It's just bizarre how, to me, I mean, how easy this has been.
Well, every time you
I feel
open
like,
them,
I feel like I've started medical school and I'm 2 weeks into it, and hey, you know, throw me into that OR and let me take out your appendix, you know. And I know that's not the right approach, you know, but that's the way I feel. I feel like, oh, I know what I'm doing here. Everything's going great.
Stay humble, and
Yeah.
you'll be fine.
yeah, if you don't stay humble, they're going to humble you. That's for
Well,
sure.
that's what I'm asking. I mean, what should I anticipate? I mean,
Well, another thing you could anticipate is if the hive ever does become less strong or even weak, you will start to see yellow jackets. And that's a clear indicator that your hive is in trouble. The other thing that can happen is ants can get into your hives. I've had to pick up a hive and move it, you know, because I couldn't get rid of the ant situation. Let's see. Oh, and I also wanted to say is every time you open your hive and start going through the comb, like if you open your hive just to see how far they've built, so you're at the back end of the hive and you're looking to see how much they have built out, that's one thing. But if you're going in to the brood nest every, you know, whenever somebody wants to come and look at them, you're really setting those bees back.
Okay, well, that's good to know. These are the sorts of things that I need to know. We've been doing a little of both. I mean, sometimes I'll just take a peek in there through the back, but we have been opening up the brood nest, and just because we get a kick out of seeing all the larvae and the pupae.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll hold back on that.
I would try to minimize looking at the brood nest now.
We're trying to teach them tricks also, but it's not working very well.
What's that?
No, just kidding.
Oh.
I said we're trying to teach them tricks, but they don't seem to be working very well. Yeah.
Trained bees, right?
Trained bees, right? Yeah.
All right, thank you. That was a good question and good. You got a good response. I hope that helps. But you know, one of the things that I was thinking about is to you know, make sure you spend some time learning about how to test for mites and what you need to do, because oftentimes we walk blindly and not realizing that we might have a mite problem, and that really affects what happens to our bees. And so our encouragement in ABQ Beaks is to test and know what your mite count is, and then know what you want to do if you hit that threshold and you need to treat.
How do you do that with a top bar hive?
Well, it's pretty similar. You know, it's you know, you can you know, if you watch some videos, I'd recommend that you watch some videos on how to do that. But you know, I've taken a top bar, I've shaken it into a bucket, and took out a half a cup of bees and tested them that way. But
oh, wow. Okay.
you know, it's not something that you know, you might want to watch someone else do it, but you definitely want to watch some YouTube videos, and there's different ways to do it with sugar or with alcohol, but that's something that gets a lot of beekeepers is mites, and we don't need to settle for that anymore. We just need to become knowledgeable on how to check for mites and how to treat for mites if we need to. And no one's immune. If there's going to be mites getting in your hive, once they get in there, they just reproduce like crazy. All they need is brood. And but that's we appreciate your question. Thank you. Our next question comes from, I don't know if I can say this name right. Is it Aslan?
It's Aislinn, but believe it or not, you are not the first person to get that one wrong. But thank you. So my question is, we installed our first 2 hives this May. We got our queens from Zia Queen Bees up in Vadito, and they've been meeting all of the standards that we know of. We found the queens after a couple of days having installed them. They're building comb. We found capped brood. And so we actually went ahead and put a queen excluder and another super on top. And all we've been doing so far is just kind of watching from the outside and putting out sugar water for them. And I guess they're starting to forage now. But again, we're just kind of trying to keep an eye on, what else do we need to know about having them here? And actually, Chris, you mentioned that the yellow jackets would be a sign of a weaker hive. We're getting yellow jackets, I think, because we have, jars of sugar water. Is that problematic? Should we consider not having the sugar water around, or maybe
you don't need the sugar water right now? As long as there's forage out there, you don't need to be feeding them. So okay. I would get that out of there as soon as possible.
Are you a langstroth or a top bar?
Langstroth.
Okay. And where are your hives located?
Northern Albuquerque, kind of, I'd say like a mile west of the balloon fiesta. So there's water, there's the ditch nearby, and we're not really worried about that, but there's just not as much in our yard right now that's blooming and actually producing anything that that would be of nutritive quality, because they just weren't foraging initially, and we thought it was just because they were getting settled, but they've just now started. So we were kind of torn on, do we take away the sugar water and let them forage, or do we keep sort of nurturing them, or what else do we do to kind of support them without hobbling them?
All right, Gerald, do you got some recommendations?
Well, how are they doing as far as building wax, building comb? How many frames have they got built out in the brood nest in the bottom box?
So the last time we opened it, because we just don't we try not to fuss with them too much, so that they won't commit early regicide there. When we checked, I want to say it was 3 weeks ago, they had about four combs built out, or 4 frames built up on about both sides. But we also put some comb from a previous hive that was no longer with us, that some robber bees managed to clean off most of the way for us. So we took it out of the box too early. We put some of that in there. And so they kind of built up their 4 and then gone over and started kind of fussing with that. And that was the other reason that we thought maybe they weren't foraging, is because maybe those combs weren't 100% clean. But that was the last time we cracked them open to check, because we haven't gotten up and checked the super above the queen excluder yet.
Yeah, the bees will clean the comb up really quickly. You want to make sure you let that, when you look down in the nest, you want to look for seams of bees, the bees that are in between those frames. And when you see, most of them filled out in that bottom box, that's when you want to super the hive. If they're not built out horizontally, if you give them more vertical space, they'll just go up and they won't go out. And so that's something that you want to make sure that you're looking at. And if you've given them already built comb, that's good, because that's how, less resources that they need to get that comb built. And since it's already there, the queen can just start laying eggs in it and, building out that brood nest.
Okay. Okay, but so for now, other than, we should wean them off the sugar water, do we cut them off cold turkey, or what's the process for that?
Well, there should be enough forage that they should be bringing it in. If you still need help building up the hive and for them to build wax and stuff, then the sugar water doesn't hurt anything. But it's obviously there's an expense to doing that, and then a lot of people, it's controversial in some ways, but if you're just building up, then it doesn't hurt. But if you've supered the hive, then they could start storing that sugar water up and making honey out of it. And while yes, it's actually honey, it's actually sugar water honey. So you probably don't want to do that.
Okay. That makes sense.
Now, do you have an entrance reducer?
That's a good, I'm going to throw that one to my counterpart, Jim. Do we have an entrance reducer? You're on mute. You're still on mute. You click the mute button.
Yeah, just got fingers here, sorry. So, no, we don't have an entrance reducer. I don't know what an entrance reducer is, but in fact, the entrance is reduced by virtue of two, sugar feeders in the portal there.
Yeah, sometimes when you use those outside feeders, that can attract some hornets. Definitely, if you're dripping, it attracts ants, and so sometimes if I know Gerald uses internal feeding mechanisms. Do you want to talk anything about that, Gerald? About ways to feed that you don't attract hornets and ants and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's difficult. The attracting, just about even just the hive by itself attracts ants. I mean, it's difficult to get rid of the ants. The best thing is to let the bees deal with it. As long as the hive is strong, you shouldn't, really have too much to worry about there. And the same thing with the yellow jackets and the hornets. As long as they're not getting into the hive, you'll see them on the outside, trying to, steal some sugar or whatever. But as long as you don't have a lot of them and they're not getting in the hive, that should be fine. I've got down in Berlin, I've got a couple of hives down there at a friend's place on his property, and there's a great big nest of hornets, or yellow jackets someplace, and we haven't figured out where. But I go down there and I'm, dispatching hornets or yellow jackets all the time. But they're not getting in the hive. They're just flying around on the outside, just trying to take advantage of whatever they can. And as far as feeders are concerned, the Boardman feeders on the entrance, just like Randy said, I mean, they're definitely good to, if you want ants, you're definitely going to have ants by putting those things on there. But the best way to feed is going to be to, put a feeder inside of the hive or something on top of the hive. But, that really doesn't completely fix that issue. It helps to minimize it a little bit. But you got to be careful with sugar whenever you go into like this coming month or so. Once the resources start to really dry up and we go into the dearth, if you're feeding, you can start a crazy robbing frenzy that you definitely don't want to have to deal with. So be careful with the sugar.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Any other questions?
I have a question. I just want to ask about getting another hive. So is that something that you guys recommend? I have one top bar hive that I got from Christianne, and should I have another hive? Should I think about that another time? What do you do with that? I mean, I have no idea. I'm very new at this, so.
Bill, we have the same question. I'm so glad you asked that.
Well, so I don't know. If somebody could just speak on that, I just would like to know what the deal is.
I have an opinion about that, Phil. Your neighbor, I would check out with your neighbor and see if she still has like 8 hives on her property.
Okay.
But I'm a real fan of not crowding your hives into one place. Now you have a big enough place that you could put a hive somewhere else.
Uh-huh.
But when you have them close together, your incidence of mites is going to increase.
Okay.
Or the possibility. But one reason to have another hive is so that you can share resources between hives.
Uh-huh.
But you always have me because I have the same hives you do.
I got it. Yeah. But I just, I was just concerned because I think about if there is a swarm thing, should they have a place to go, or do they just fly off and go somewhere else? And I just trying to figure all this out.
Well, yes, you do want to catch the swarm, and if you want to keep it, you should have another hive to put it into.
Uh-huh.
Or somebody that wants it that you can call up right away and give it to them or sell it to them, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
But you should have that pre-planned for sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. And do you know if they're going to get ready to swarm? I don't know why I'm worried about it. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but if they do get ready to swarm, do you see more queen cells, and then that's your indication that they're not liking the queen and they're going to split up and go?
Boy, that's a loaded question. Yeah, I can contribute a little bit to that if that's okay. One of the things is we were talking earlier about, what do you do? How often do you go in there? And so the recommendation was to minimize the amount of time that you spend in there. And that's a very good recommendation. The more that you disturb the nest, the more the bees are going to not like the queen, to the point that they could ball her up and kill her or supersede her, so that your actions there can directly contribute to the loss of part of your hive to a swarm or loss of the queen, just through inspecting too much. On the other hand, you want to make sure that you're going in there often enough to see what's going on. So just to kind of keep an eye on things and see if you need to take some kind of action. So okay. Every 10 days is a good number. You'll hear something around that, just because it takes the bees 16 days to raise a queen. And if you're in there once every 10 days, you can detect queen cells. You can find the queen, verify that she's still there, look for eggs, that kind of thing. And then, you'll be able to make a decision on what to do.
Okay. Whenever
you find those cells in there. Typically, you'll see cells along the bottom of the frames. And this isn't 100%. The bees will teach you something new every day. I think somebody said they'll humble you, and they absolutely will do that. I've been humbled many times by my bees, and continue to get humbled by them. So you got to definitely pay attention to them, because they'll do what they want to do 100% of the time, and they'll only do what you want them to do. Well, just depends on how lucky you get, I guess.
Okay. Awesome.
But yeah, so I would, when you go in and inspect, you can look and see if there's any supersedure cells also, and you'll typically see those in the field of the frame as a general rule, and you'll see swarm cells along the bottom. So you just need to keep an eye. They'll make cups all the time. Most of the time, those little cups will be empty. But when you start seeing them filling up those cups or building cells, you need to figure out what else is going on. And a lot of times you can't stop them. You have to try to figure out how to deal with it.
Okay. I'll call Christianne and have her form. Okay.
All right, thank you. So our next person on the list is Stephen Black. And if you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Well, hi. This is a great follow-up question to what was just talked about, because I have a photo to show you of a frame from inside my one of my strongest. I have 2 langstroth hives, and I just added a top bar this year. But my strongest hive, which I've been keeping an eye on, going in about once a week. Can I pull up a picture of the frame? Can I share it on my screen? Would that be okay?
You're on mute, Randy.
I've given you permission to share.
Okay.
So go ahead and share.
Okay. Can you see this? Can you see the picture?
Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
so there's a lot of really good brood pattern. But then over here, I just saw there's 4 queen cells, and these queen cells are not empty. They're actually capped.
Mm.
And so I see a lot, I didn't see the queen on this inspection. I'm ashamed to admit it. I still have trouble finding the queen, even though I looked with my fellow beekeeper. But anyway, I keep thinking this is a really strong hive. She's laying like crazy. It's busting with bees, but I'm concerned about these 4 queen cells. And
Well, you got more like 8 of them. At
well,
least.
these are swarm cells down here, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's queen cells everywhere. So those are queen cells as well. And there's a couple other ones over on the right-hand side there. So, yeah, so did you see any eggs in there at all?
Well, I also would say that I'm not really good at finding eggs, but there's definitely larvae.
The queen cells look capped to me. Were they all capped?
At least these 4 for sure are capped, yes.
How new is your hive?
No, it's a couple years old.
Oh,
And you're up in Santa Fe, so you're a couple weeks, you may be a week or 2 maybe behind Albuquerque. So
I gave them some room. I mean, they weren't, 10 frames full of bees in either the bottom deep or the top deep, but I switched the top and the bottom because most of the activity was up top, and so I flipped them, and then I put a medium super on top just to make sure they had plenty of room. But if I was raising queens, I guess I would graft these cells, but I don't know whether I should try to, I was thinking about maybe starting a little nuke with maybe.
How many frames do you have that have cells on them?
This is the only one that I saw like this.
Yeah, I mean, you need to be able to know whether or not you have eggs in there. Those cells are 9+ days old, and they will have queens emerging from them in 6 days or so.
So you think the queen has failed?
She may have. Those look like supersedure cells, and the way that they're built, and again, it's these rules aren't, the bees don't follow rules. I mean, we just observe things and kind of generally categorize them, but those look like supersedures to me, and I would say that when was this picture taken?
This past weekend.
Yeah, so you could have queens emerge at any time, but you're not going to be able to stop them. One thing you could do is take that frame and another couple frames and make a nuke out of it. You need to find your queen and see if she's still in there. With those supersedure cells, what generally happens is you'll have a queen or more emerge from the cells. Sometimes they'll tear them down, and kill the other queens, but that's not always the case. And with supersedures, I have seen on a number of occasions multiple queens in the hive, and they'll go like that for a little while, and then eventually, they'll kill off the other queen. But if the hive isn't busting at the seams with bees, then I would be really thinking it's a supersedure. They don't really look like emergency cells. I mean, does anybody else have any commentary on what they think about that?
It kind of looks like a supersedure to me, and so you got to be careful. And that's one of the things that is hard. You know, you've got to look at the rest of the hive to determine whether you have a failing queen and they're going to supersede her, or your hive's just busting and they're trying to swarm. You know, it doesn't always. But when you got queen cells coming out of the comb like that, that's an indication of either emergency cells or supersedure cells, but it's not 100%.
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting too that there's so many of them. That is indicative of emergency cells for sure. But you know,
So to
just
remind you
as
about,
big and as well fed as they are, and that may just be a function of the timing. You know, right now we've got plenty of resources coming in, so they could all be really well fed. A lot of times emergency cells are not real nice and healthy and robust, you know. So but that queen is laying up a storm and she's doing a really good job. So it'd be, you know, something's wrong with her. They're not happy with her for some reason, or she died, you know, something happened to her. She got rolled, accidentally killed or something, and the bees built up a bunch of cells.
okay, great. So if I go in there in a couple days and I still see larvae, does that mean the queen is still laying, or if larva sits around uncapped for how long? Can you remind me?
It's capped on the 9th day. So if the eggs get laid, it's an egg for 3 days. And if you see an eggs and they're standing straight up in the bottom of the cell, I mean, like that in the bottom of the cell, there's a good chance that egg was laid, you know, within the last 12 hours or so. And that eventually that egg will start to fall over and be laying down in the bottom of the cell. And after about 2 days to 3 days, and on the 3rd day, that egg will hatch and become a larvae in the bottom of the cell. And you'll see the what they call milk brood. The cells will actually have a milky kind of appearance down in the bottom of them. But larvae, and they'll be larvae, you know, for another 6 days, and then the bees will cap those cells, and then they'll be pupa for the rest of the time until they emerge. So 9 days, whether it's a queen cell or a drone cell or a worker cell, 9 days and they cap them.
All right.
So
well,
I was just going to comment on the color of the cappings. It's still very light colored. So it almost seems like it's, you know, your queen, if she did die, she didn't die too long ago. And, or so that if they decided to supersede her for some other reason.
yeah.
They
So-
started building those queen cells like 9 or 10 or 11 days ago, you know, so yeah, it hadn't been long at all. It's been a week.
Yeah,
So-
I'd look for eggs. I'd take a magnifying glass out there. If you can't see them with the naked eye, take a magnifying glass and really look at your lightest cappings and see if you can look next to them and see if you can find eggs.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate the help. It was a real puzzle.
All right. Thank you. So Joe, it looks like you're next. Joe, you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, I want to hear a discussion on queen excluders. Yes, no, I keep hearing both directions, so I thought maybe.
All right,
Which would-
Gerald, what are your thoughts on queen excluders?
Go ahead, Gerald. It's a Lang question.
Yeah, see there? So that ought to tell you something right there.
Yes, it
Those
is.
queen excluders. No, I get it's a personal decision, and it really depends on what you're trying to do. You know, So I use queen excluders, but not really on my hives that I'm trying to actually make honey. I just let the bees do their thing. And generally speaking, the queen will stay lower in the hive. If you've got a lower entrance, the brood nest is going to be near the entrance and the honey is going to be further away. And as a general rule, and again, the bees don't follow rules, we just kind of make these observations, but she won't go across, a honey band, and the bees will tend to store the honey further away. And if they need more room in the brood nest, they'll move honey out of the brood nest area away from it. So usually further away from the entrance is where you're going to find the food stores. So, a lot of people put queen excluders on to keep the queen out of their supers so they don't lay in there. If you have 2 deep hive bodies or 3 medium hive bodies as your brood nest, she generally won't go up into the supers up above that. As long as they're built out all the way, side to side, she just won't go up there. If you take a brood nest and put a hive body on top of it to super it, and she has it built out all 10 frames, she'll just go up. And you put another one and she'll just go up. And you put another one and she'll just go up. So you'll just have this kind of tube up the middle of your hive and nothing on the edges, and she'll lay up in there. But you can keep her from doing that by making sure that the bees have built out the frames throughout the box before you add another super, or pretty close, 90% of it or so.
So
Yeah,
I have
two
something I can say about that.
Good.
Randy, should I get into Darwinian beekeeping here, or Lulu?
You're welcome. You're welcome to offer any comments.
Yes, anything.
What's that, Joe?
Oh, I said any suggestion. I have 2 brood supers and the queen excluder and then a super on top of that.
Oh, okay.
Like that right now.
Well, the reason I use queen excluders in my langstroth hives is because I am keeping my langs according to Dr. Tom Seeley's Darwinian beekeeping method. It's a mechanical method of controlling the amount of brood in your hive so that you don't necessarily have to treat your hives for varroa if they're doing it with controlling the amount of brood and the number of times they swarm. So I keep a queen excluder over 1 brood box in my langs. I'm not raising bees for honey in those langs, although I do get honey, but that's the reason I use them. And you often have to, I don't know if do you have mediums on top of the queen excluders?
No. A regular.
They're full.
They're full boxes.
And do they have upper entrances? Do you have little holes? And
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, that's good. And that's the only thing that I've really had trouble with is getting to the bees to use those holes instead of going through the hive every single time they want to go up. Anyway, that's the only reason I would use them.
We're kind of we like the bees for the bees' sake. And, that's why we said, okay, the excluder's theirs. They have the 2 bottom ones and we'll never mess with it. I mean, we look at it and take care of it, but we'll only take honey from the top one.
Well, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because I highly recommend that everybody reads Dr. Seeley's paper on Darwinian beekeeping, and it's readily available online if you just Google Darwinian beekeeping.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for the question. So our next person is Eli. Eli, take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Hi there. So we just got our first top bar last month, I guess. And my question was just a short one. Just what is the importance of finding like the queen herself? I also have a problem, seeing the little eggs, but we have been able to see the larva. So is that like okay that we're not able to find the queen yet, or?
What are you able to see? Have you been able to see capped brood?
Yes, there's capped brood and we can see larva. But again, I had, the eggs are so small.
Yeah. Well, at some point, it's not necessary to train your eye right now to see eggs. You don't have to do everything all at once, but at some point you're going to want to do that. And you will most likely see eggs at the back of the brood nest, where they're building new comb. So at some point, I would go past, are they making just honeycomb yet, or are they still making brood?
I think we have it where they're just making honeycomb now.
Okay, so you can go pull some of that honeycomb back and then start looking at the last frames that have brood in them. And I don't think it's necessary to see the queen. I don't know what Gerald and everybody else thinks, but I think if you see cap brood at this point, that's satisfactory. And if they're building straight, is your top bar, are they cross combing, or are they?
No, we've had like no cross combing. There was one bar that was a little like double, but we just cut the smaller one off.
Chris, Eli is my son, and so when I talked about how we're expert beekeepers at 1 month and they're doing straight things, so he's the other half of that. So I don't want you to think that there are two people who are suddenly experts at 1 month. We're the same. We're the experts.
So, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
You're going to want to see eggs at some point. I'm a top bar beekeeper too. So right now, remember about the heat. Since you don't have any frames around your top bars, the wax. But if you take your top bar with the bars on the bottom and the comb is on the top, and you tilt it early in the morning where the light comes in on it, the sun, if you just you can just tweak the bar a little bit, not too much, because you don't want it falling over. So and the comb is on, you can start seeing you tilt it early in the morning. Eggs. I use the light, use the sun to help see the eggs, and it gets really easy to do that. Another thing, so it's good to start practicing. If you get in early in the morning, not too early, the mornings have been pretty chilly. You don't want to chill the brood, but you can start looking that way. And at some point during the summer, you're gonna want to start to find the queen, because when you test for mites, you do not want to put that queen in the jar. You will kill her. So you're gonna have to find the queen to test for mites. So start to do that. Another thing, there was a good book out, a woman who came, I don't want to chill the brood, but you can start looking at to find the queen, because you don't want to put that queen in the summer. That book on queen spotting. Hillary, test for mites. So she has that book on queen spotting. Hillary, so we have to find the queen to test it up or order it online. Her name, she has pictures. She starts with Hillary. You can maybe even get it from the library. Beginning ones are easy. If you can start spotting, and then as you progress through the book, it'll get harder and harder to see the queen, but the queen is always there. So she moves really fast. There it is. Thank you, Randy.
It's backwards. It's backwards, but that's what the cover looks like.
No, that's it. It's right. It's right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
It looks backwards.
No, that's perfect. That looks great. Yeah, we don't know what the hell we're doing. We open the thing up. Everything looks great, but man, we don't know but we're liking it. We're really having a good time.
Yeah.
So you will want to find eggs, and it'll get easier. Just kind of be patient, tilt it a little bit, and I can always find when I was starting to try to find them. That's how I can see them.
Okay. Sweet. Well, thank you.
Another option is to learn how to mark your queens. Some people don't like to mark their queens, but I like to mark my queens because I can find her a lot easier when she's marked. And there are different tools that you can purchase to help you capture the queen and then mark her. And eventually you'll learn how to just grab her with your fingers and mark her. But you can practice on drones to capture. Just grab a drone. They're a little easier to catch than queens, but you can practice on drones and learn how to hold on to the bee without damaging it, and mark it. And so, you know, that's another option if you have trouble finding a queen, is to just learn how to mark her or get her marked.
Okay.
We'll set you to work, Eli. You know.
Sounds good. Sounds good, Dad.
Another, that sometimes the hive will tell you where the queen is. When you get closer and closer to where the queen is on the bar, you'll hear a So if you're not talking, if you're just listening to the hive, some hives will tell you when you're getting close to the queen.
All right. Good questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Susan, you are up. Take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Okay, I'm off mute, I think.
Yes.
You know, I had a lot of questions before you helped me out, Randy. So you answered a lot of my questions when you came and visited my bee yard and talked with me on the phone. So thank you. I guess you know, I have some just sort of curiosity questions, but the most critical question would be about Varroa testing and treating. And, you know, I've been trying to read up on it and watch videos, etc. But the majority, it's like 90% of the stuff I see out there, even when I search for top bar Varroa treatment, it just brings up a lot of langstroth stuff. And it's talking about supers and all kinds of things that I have no idea what those things are. So, and it seems like there are some critical differences between top bar in terms of, you know, you don't have space between the bars like you do in a lang, etc. So when should we be testing and treating? Some people say, I even heard it tonight, oh, you don't have to treat in the first year. Well, other people say, no, you do have to treat in the first year. And I lost a hive to Varroa. And, you know, this is one of the reasons I asked for this, suggested this meeting, was because 2 months ago, our first Zoom meeting, we had all of the little squares, everybody on there. And it was like, I lost my hive, next person, I lost my hive, next person, I lost 2 hives. I mean, everybody had lost their hives. We have to stop losing our hives, I think. So anyway, that's a long way of saying, what about Varroa for top bar?
Well, that would be a question for Lulu, I think.
Yeah, Lulu, why don't you answer that question?
Yep.
I make a baseline. I don't lose my hives anymore because I test for mites, and then if I have to treat, if it goes over 2%, 3% during the year, it's usually just in September or so when your mite count's going up. I don't know if you saw the meeting the other night. The bee population is growing in June, and then it starts, they start getting ready for winter in June and July, so their population starts dropping off. But the mite population exponentially skyrockets if you have mites. Okay, so I tend to test every couple of months. And with top bar, there really is no difference for testing mites. You take the bar out. Did you watch the meeting the other night? And we have recorded this. Amy,
yes, I did.
Yes,
I watched that meeting, and I saw Amy do it all, yeah.
Every couple of, okay. So get your baseline. If you test every 2 or 3 months and watch what happens. But absolutely, it's crucial. You really don't want to wait till August or September to test, because if they're high at that point, okay, the bees have been stressed. Okay, so every durability of their, but absolutely, it's crucial. You have body organs to keep the toxicity down in the hive test. Okay. So I would say, as long as you have enough bees to at least test now. Okay, and then find out what the percentage is. Yeah. I use the alcohol because it is, as long as you have a little OCD about it, because I soak them for about 4 or 5 hours, then I roll them out, and I count every bee. And then after I get the count for the mites and the bees, I put the bees because it's OCD about it, because I usually find some more bees. Remember, those mites are underneath those plates on the abdomen. So they're stuck way up inside there. The mites and the bees, extremely accurate now, okay? And then I determine, do I need to treat? And we have, I get a site that will help walk you through, what do I do? What time plates way up inside there. And then about what you're using, and if people have supers, you have honey, you know, to determine that. If it's a new hive, maybe you might not have to test, but at least every few months, every 3 months, get your numbers, get to determine your baseline. If it's a new, maybe you might not have to tell you, you know, each time you get a snapshot for that moment in time, that many bees, what's going on in the hive. But if you do that 4 times in your hive, it's more a history of the mite situation, how well your bees can sustain what's going on. Do they have Varroa sensitive hygiene? Are they dealing with it? Are they getting overrun with it? So and August is important, and then August and September, even if the mites aren't that high, again, it's exponential. If you have 2%, in 1 month it's 4%, and the next month it's 16%,
Right.
you're gonna lose your hive, even with 4%. If
Right.
I have 2% going into September, I treat, and then I test again to see if it worked. If it didn't work, I treat again. You want the lowest possible amount of mites in your hive going into the winter, because again, fat body organ, who's in there? The bees. What are they? Another name for them is called fat bees. They got a lot of fat body organ. They have to keep the temperature warm enough for the queen, and when she starts laying in January. So you got to keep your mite count down. You
Right.
got to help those bees.
And so what's the preference for top bar beekeepers in terms of treatment? Do you have a preference?
It depends on what time of year.
Mhm.
I don't use, I tend to, my hives, because I keep an eye on them and I usually use like Formic Pro, but if it's too hot, you got to have at least the first 3 days that the temps have to be below 92. And it's really imperative that you have enough ventilation. So I usually take off my last 3 bars on the back of my hive, put screening over there so no one can get in, and prop the top up. And make sure all of the other, my hives, I ventilate my hives really well. Because the bees can put propolis on it, but I take all the propolis off and I vent it really well. And I've never lost a queen. Some of the larvae might melt a little bit. I do lose some bees, but with the first time I did it, I didn't ventilate enough. And I did lose like a pile of bees, but now I don't. So, and the formic acid always works. People talk about using different treatments. It all depends on what you're willing, how you want to deal with the mite population. But the biggest thing is get your numbers, get your mite numbers, get your mite population, and watch and see what happens with them. So,
yeah, I was going to say that's spot on. That's and kind of wanted to qualify something that I had said earlier. You know, if it's a first year hive, generally you don't have a big mite problem, but that doesn't mean you won't have a big mite problem. And the only way you're going to know is if you do keep an eye on it and test. So that's what I was actually saying earlier was, you know, you need to generally don't have to worry about it, but if you see the mites building up in there, then you do have to take some kind of action. And the only way you're going to know is to actually to test.
Right. I think I got the concept of testing, but so now I'm kind of concerned about treating, but maybe I'm just putting the cart before the horse.
So what was have you tested your hive yet?
Not yet, but I'm thinking I will soon to get a
This
baseline.
is a good time. June
Yeah.
is a good time.
Yeah.
You got enough bees, you still have some drone, you're gonna have a lot of larvae. You know,
Yeah.
take a comb that has a lot of open brood. That's where the mites are gonna be on the nurse bees. Use those combs, you'll get a much more accurate number of for mites. Because people say, oh, just use brood comb. It has to be open. There can be some cap use brood, but your combs, you'll get a much more accurate. You really got to have it open because that's where the mites are going to go in there. Larva also has their fat organ body. It's very big in proportion to their because people say, oh, they got a lot of food in there. And that's why too with the fat bees, the winter bees, there's a lot of food in there for the mites, you know, the fat body organ. They're really juicy.
Right.
Those two in particular. So take a
Right.
comb that has a lot of open brood.
I would recommend that you go to our website and you on the left-hand side of the website, there's a section called resources.
Right.
And if you go through the Be Informed Mite Check and the Varroa decision tool, that will give you information about the different treatments, and it will ask you questions and help you to decide, okay, if I do have a mite problem, what are my options? And so I would recommend taking a look at that.
I looked at that today, but then when I pretended you have to answer the question. So it said, do you have mites? You know, is it a problem? So I said yes. So I could move forward into what the treatments were. But the treatments, it seemed like, I'll go look again. I don't want to take up everybody's time with this, but it kind of looked like they were instructions for top bar hive, for langstroth hives, and for top bar it said, oh, you better read some more about this, because like hanging strips, for example, you can't hang strips in the same way on a top bar that you do in a lang. I don't know. So I'll do some more studying about it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Christina. And Christina, if you take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Thanks. Hi. So I'm in Placitas, and I started my first hive this April 13th, I believe. I got a package from Craig of Papa Bears and installed it after the snow stopped. Everything seems to be going fine. I saw them bringing pollen back within about 3 days and very active. I started with combless frame. Combless foundation, and I have a deep box on the bottom, and those frames are pretty much, well, I checked 10 days ago and the frames are pretty much full, except for maybe 3 sides. So I was going out of town, and so I put the next 10 frames in, and they still haven't advanced to that. And I'm wondering, should I have put all 10 frames on the next level in? I've removed the sugar water, or should I only give them a few and put them in tight? What's the procedure there? Also, I have another question about ventilation. The other day was really hot here, 100. And Hayes, I went to Hayes Honey Farm, and he warned me about when it got really hot to crack it a little bit in the back. Now, should I just be leaving that open all the time now, or cracking it every morning when it's going to get into the high 90s? That's my 2 questions for right now.
All right, Gerald, do you have a response for that?
A lot of things you can do for ventilation. I like to take and crack the hive top open. I just stick a popsicle stick up there just to leave a little space to let the heat, kind of flow up and out. You don't want too much, but you just need enough. If the bees are, really hanging out in the front and they're bearding pretty badly, you need a little bit more ventilation. If they're not hanging out on the front of the hive, then I wouldn't worry about it.
And what about her question about adding frames? She asked if she could just add a couple of frames in a in another box up above the brood chamber with about 70% full. And how many frames should she put up above there in the next box?
Well, if you put any empty space in there, they will build comb hanging from it. And so you need to have the box completely full of frames, if I'm understanding the question correctly. It needs to be, yeah, it needs to be completely full of frames. You need to have all 10 frames in there. And speaking of frames, I don't know, my opinion is that they should all be pressed completely together and centered in the box. That gives you the correct bee space all across the entire box.
Okay, that's what I have.
Yeah.
Okay. And then here's a really stupid question. I'm reading the book I got from the class that we'll be taking next year. And so I guess I'm not sure, you know, when does a box become a honey super versus a brood box? Is it just, if it's a deep, it's always a brood box, and then the smaller ones are honey supers? Or is it when the bees decide to just don't dedicate to honey above, it's a honey super? What's this distinction?
Well, the bees will basically build what they want where they want. And generally speaking, we can get them to build a brood nest close to the entrance. So in the bottom box, 10 frames, just one single box is more than enough for any beehive to you know, use as a brood nest. I mean, if you think about it, there's 7,000 cells on one deep frame in a langstroth hive. And so you've got 10 frames, and if you've got a couple frames of, you know, honey and pollen, and then most of the rest of them are brood, that's an awful lot of bees. And by the time the bees are hatched out, the queen, and the queen has laid up all the rest of them, she comes back around and can lay up the ones that are open again. So there's more than enough space in one deep brood box. But generally speaking, if you put another box on top, the queen will lay most of that up as brood. Typically the center 4 or 5 frames will be brood for sure. And the bottom box, you know, you'll have anywhere 7 or 8 frames of brood, just depending. You put another hive up on top of that, the bees typically will store the honey up in there. And as you're building the hive up and it's going vertically, the bees will store the honey up in the upper boxes, and the queen won't go past that honey. And so you kind of, you know, stop her from progressing vertically. And that's generally what does it, is just because of the way the resources are coming in and where she's laying. So there's no real rule there. She can end up going up higher and laying into the box. And this is the reason why a lot of people like to use queen excluders, is to prevent that from happening. And as was mentioned earlier, you know, you just need the one box and you can put a queen excluder on that box. Another thing that you can do is you can actually let the queen lay up into that box, and then once she's actually laid up some brood in there, you can take and make sure she's in the bottom box and put a queen excluder over the bottom box. The bees will come up and take care of the brood that's in there. And then once all that brood hatches out, they'll backfill it with honey, and they'll start, you know, putting foodstuffs in, and you can use that as a food storage for overwintering the hive. So it's just another method of managing them, depending on how you want to do it. But the higher you go, generally it's going to be honey up high and brood down low.
So, sorry, you broke up for a little bit there for me. So maybe you said this, but I want to make sure I've got it straight. Should I add a third box then at this point to encourage them to start putting honey up there? Or do I wait until the second box is full?
I would wait until the second box is about 90% built out.
Okay.
So I have a few, you asked about whether to leave it cracked all the time or just in the morning. All the time. Once you do it, every time you take that lid off, you make sure it's cracked the same way each time you put the lid back. And then as far as the sizes of the boxes, I've seen many hives all in medium-sized boxes, 5.5-inch boxes. And those are brood boxes where she's laying brood, and they're honey boxes where there's honey. So it's really just up to you what you call the box.
Well, that would explain why sometimes it seems like the terms are interchangeable in this book. One last question. When I started my hive, I was encouraged to put a reducer. And so I just had like a quarter of the entrance open. I had white duct tape was what I was told to use. I've pulled it back halfway now. Should I be opening that up more or leave it? What determines that?
It depends if there's a traffic jam. If there's a traffic jam, I'd open it up more. If there's not, then, and they're perfectly happy, then I would leave it the way it is.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
All right, great questions. All right, Mark, you're next. Mark, you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question? Mark, are you still there? You know how to take yourself off mute?
When I don't think he's there.
Hello?
Oh, there he is. Okay, there you go, Mark. Ask your question.
Hi, yes, I was actually messing with the bees. But I had a question about the cross combing and what causes it generally and how do you resolve it?
What kind of hive do you use?
Langstroth.
Okay. All right, Gerald, why is he getting cross combing on his langstroth hive? What are some reasons?
So, yeah, are you using wax foundation, plastic foundation, no foundation? What kind of frames are you using?
So foundationless and then the plastic or the wax foundations in between each one. So alternating.
Yeah, generally that should work. They should build, pretty much straight down. If they're not, are the frames all pressed tightly together?
The frames are pressed tightly together, but I actually just got a couple new packages this year, and I started with the Appy May hives. I had the cedar flow hives before, but
right.
So these were all new because I had a couple incident and wasn't able to get to my bees a couple years ago.
On your foundationless frames, do you have starter strips or spine or something down the center of them at the top, or how's that configured?
No, I didn't put anything on them at the top. It's basically just the spine and has about 2/3 of the way, 1/3 of the way, and then on that third of the way, sort of has like what would be equivalent to like a rubber bands.
Okay, yeah, that's probably part of it. The bees generally, and this is something that, the top bar beekeepers can comment on probably, better because they know where the bees will try to build that comb. If you've got a spine down the middle of the frame top, or if you have like a starter strip or something, the way I do mine is I put a piece of like starter strip all the way across. I take wax foundation and cut strips out of it and then fasten it into the groove. And the bees seem to like that the best. But if you put just a spine down the middle of the frame, they'll build off of that. If you don't do that, then they'll kind of start willy-nilly building stuff.
So I was reading in Hillary's website the other day, the Beekeeping Like a Girl, because I was having trouble with a lot of cross combing in my foundationless ones, and she said that it was because you do alternate. When you alternate foundation with foundationless, their tendency to cross comb is much greater, and so they'll build. And this is happening in the langstroth hive I was talking about at the beginning, where they're filling in over to the foundation, so they're doubling up. They're like, I've got one frame that has 2 combs in it. So I would recommend just putting foundation on the honey the two outside honey frames, and then leaving straight foundationless your inner 6 frames. Don't alternate them with foundation, and see if that helps.
Okay.
I'm just going by what Hillary said.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And I didn't experience that problem with mine, but I was putting the foundationless in between already drawn out combs of foundation.
Well,
So that
that's different.
probably did not give them enough space to double deck it like you were talking about.
Yeah, that's different. That's good.
Yeah.
So.
All right, Mark, thank you. That was a great question. And now it's 7:52, so we're getting close to the end of this, and we have Kurt. You are next with your question. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. My question is regarding a langstroth hive.
Kurt, your sound is a little off. Are you using a phone, or do you have a Wi-Fi connection? Your sound is kind of.
He's gargling.
You're gargling, yeah.
You know, we can read his chat, his thing in the chat column. His question, is it about ant cant? Kurt?
Yeah, Kurt, is it about ants? No, we can't hear you now. So Christianne, did he ask a question about ants in the chat?
In the chat, it looks like he says, I have found ant cant spray to be very useful against ants and easier to use than grease or tanglefoot.
Okay.
I don't know what that is. So.
All right, Kurt, you want to try again? Let's see. You got to. Kurt's back on mute. All right. Do we have any? You know, Kurt, if you come back and want to ask your question, just break in. But does anyone else have a question they would like to ask, or any comments from Lulu or Christianne?
Yes, is anybody available to do FaceTime, to mentor FaceTime by FaceTime for mentoring with the beehives with the langstroths?
Well, you know, we didn't get off this year with having mentor sign-up sheets, but one of the things that you can do is just go to the website and make a request. And you know, we have lots of beekeepers that you know you can potentially get connected with that can help you out. And you know, that's one of the things that is good about a beekeeping group like this is we have a lot of experience. And you know, we would ask that those who have experience and some time to reach out to those that are requesting to be mentored. That would be very helpful.
Thank you.
I'd like to mention, we're going to the last summer. So we talk about resources, pollen and nectar, but let's remember water too. The really cool thing that bees do, you know, people are familiar with swamp coolers. Bees collect water and they dance and tell others that there are specific the job of some of the bees when it starts getting warm is they carry water. So you're gonna want, make sure that you have water in your yard, not in front of the entrance. So, because what they do is they come back, they carry it, and then they either spray it to on each other with their mouths, or they stick it inside empty cells and they fan their wings to like a swamp cooler to cool off the hive, because it gets really hot as the bees build up. They all have their heat. They generate heat, the activity, the brood. They need to keep that heat down. So make sure you have water, a water source. You do not want the bees to go to your neighbor's yard where your neighbor has a nice fountain or has a dog with a dog bowl. You're going to piss off your neighbor. So hopefully the bees haven't already found the water bowl. Have a nice, I use like a little tray at the bottom. You're going to want, make sure that you have a plant, a potted plant, so it's really shallow. I use a fairly good size, like a 12 to 14 inch. And then you put little pebbles or stones in there because bees will drown. So they can land on the stone and take that water back. And when it's really hot, if that's their water source, they are going to go through a lot of water to keep that hive cool. So don't keep it in the entrance, because if they're pooping in it, they won't use it anymore. I also don't clean out the tray a lot. There are a lot, and then they either spray it to each other, and then it's good. So just remember water. Water is always important, but particularly now. So that's my 2 cents about water.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll reinforce what Lulu says. There's two different things that I do. First, I use a bird bath, and as Lulu said, I put pebbles in it so they can land. The other thing that I think works really effectively is I bought one of those auto refilling dog bowls so that there's a reservoir of water, and I put pebbles in that, and that way it keeps it keeps filling up as the water evaporates or gets drunk. Chris, I think you said something.
I think we've lost.
So do you notice a lot of bees?
Okay, yeah.
Say that again, Lulu.
You notice a lot of bees at your water source?
They seem to like the bird bath better than the dog bowl, but you know they do use both of them. But I'll often find more bees at the bird bath than at the dog bowl. But you know, at least they're also using the dog bowl.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Douglas. We have one question from Douglas. Douglas, go ahead and ask your question.
I just want to follow up on this water issue. We're in Los Ranchos, and probably about 100 feet from the hive, or maybe a tiny bit more. We have a 125-gallon horse trough that we don't have horses. We just use it for watering plants and what have you. And in that, I have about 5 or 6 burlap bags that are used to give gifts of wine, just to give you an idea of the size. And those are filled up with corks, wine corks, so they float on the surface so that the bees have a landing pad. We've never seen a bee there.
Do you live by a ditch?
There are ditches nearby. Yeah, there are ditches nearby. I mean, I know they're getting water, but we have set up such a nice home for them, and we feel so rejected.
Well, there's your first humility lesson.
Again, they humble you, and they never do what you want them to do. They always do.
Yeah, and I have found that if I put a water source out early in the spring, that the bees are more likely to use that water source, because once they find something else, they don't generally come back to what you offer them if they found something else. So.
Oh, is that right? So wherever they're going, they'll just keep going to the ditch, I guess.
Yeah, they'll keep going where they're going, probably.
Okay. All right.
Except next
year.
Unless your neighbor finds out you have bees and is upset because the bees are in the dog water bowl. But try again next spring. Maybe you'll start.
The horse stuff's not moving. I mean, we're not moving that thing. And the little burlap sacks with the wine corks, they're easy enough to keep in there. I just thought it was such a nice little setting for them. Oh, well.
Now, once they find it, then they'll use it regularly. It's just a matter of them doing that.
Well, it's one of the tricks we're trying to teach them, to go to the water. Not working.
Your waggle dance is not telling them where the water source is. So you got to work on your waggle dance.
I agree.
We've been waggling, but it's just not pretty. Not pretty.
All right. Well, we want to thank Christianne and Gerald for helping us out. We really appreciate it. They're great beekeepers, and we have many more beekeepers in our group, and so never be afraid to ask questions. And we had some really great questions tonight, and hopefully it helps a lot of people. And so thank you very much. Lulu, do you have anything to say in closing?
I just want to remind people that we will have our regular meeting on the 4th Tuesday of the month, June 23rd, from 6:30 to 8:30. You'll get a blast. It's going to be on Steve Baca from the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. He comes every year and talks to our group about pesticides, it's on New Mexico, how it affects your bees, and if you find that your bees have been poisoned, what you can do about it. So it'll be very informative. I also have an entomologist coming who's going to talk about, because it came up last year, people were really upset that their neighbors were using pesticides and herbicides, and so it'll tell your neighbors, particularly if they don't like weeds or aphids or whatever, pests. So she is going to talk about IPM, which stands for the Integrated Pest Management. So she'll give you some pointers where if you see your neighbors spraying, you might want to have a dialogue with them that there are other options. And it might not happen the first year, it might not even happen the second year. Their neighbors used to have Nolan's bee spray, a sprayer, come for cockroaches. And every year we would talk about this. We'd have a conversation. It took her 5 years, but she finally, because I'd get her all excited about the plants in my yard and the bees and the native bees and all the bugs and stuff, she finally stopped doing that. So I said to her, why did you stop? So, because you got me excited about the web of life and all the plants. So, Jim. She'll give you some pointers.
Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, you can't see me. So we have that meeting, and someone wrote asked a question about what do you do about summer management hives. That'll be in July. We'll have a langstroth and a top bar beekeepers talking, and I said to her, why did you stop? And like I said earlier, in July, the bees are getting ready for winter. So we'll talk about, okay, you can hear me. Okay, you can't see me, but just for a heads up. So I hope you join us for our June 23rd meeting. And again, so that'll be at our July meeting, just for a head. We, as beekeepers, the longer you keep bees, the more you realize, don't be afraid to ask questions, because that'll be at our July meeting. But as beekeepers, the more constantly teach you, the more humble you are, the more you listen to them, or our June, the more you learn. So we're all learning. This was wonderful. It was lots of fun. And thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Christianne. Thank you, everybody. The more you learn. So
hey, Lulu. Lulu, is that a Zoom? Lulu, is that a Zoom meeting, or is that actually at the church?
No, we're still doing Zoom. The church is not ready to open yet.
Okay,
so
thank you.
It'll be Zoom until otherwise. Yeah, we'll send out the link. Thanks, Joe, for asking that question. Yes, to clarify that. So anybody else want to say anything, and then we'll sign off?
I have one thing to say about spraying. Call the city 311 number and request no spraying in the vicinity of your house, because your neighbors, if they're upset about somebody's pond generating mosquito larvae, that sort of thing, the city can come and spray. But if you've requested no spraying, your request supersedes any of your neighbors' requests to have spraying happen.
Thank you,
and pass that around to everybody, because now is the time when this is going to start, the spraying.
That's right. Another thing you can do is when we have a button on our website, Drift Watch or Field Watch, you can register your hives. So anyone who's going to spray a big, like a business, they can check and see where your hives are and talk to you about it. So there are things now, but so tune in June 23rd for our meeting and learn some more stuff.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Christianne.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good summer.
Stay safe. Learn some more stuff. Thank you, Chris.